In order to find the amplitude of this sine curve, what you're looking for is from the midline, how far up and down each hill goes, hill or valley. And so that goes up 3, down 3, so your amplitude is 3. In order to write the equation for the cosine function, we first want to do our map, our midline, amplitude, and period. Our midline, you can see the middle of this is y equals 0. The amplitude's 1 because you go up 1 and down 1. And the period from start to ending is 2 pi. So, what do we do there? Well, we look at it next. We know a cosine, and I'm going like this. But cosine starts at the bottom. Normally cosine starts up here. So when it starts at the bottom, it's going to be a negative a value. My a value is 1, so it's negative 1. Cosine. There's no k, so there's no number added at the end. And why is this just theta or x? Well, if the period's 2 pi, the normal period is 2 pi, okay, of a sinusoid, sine or cosine. So how would you find b? B is a number in front of here. Why is this 1 in front here? Well, you do 2 to find b. You technically do 2 pi divided by this number. So 2 pi divided by 2 pi is 1. So that's why that number right there is a 1. Also, you can notice is that if your period is ever 2 pi, you know this is just going to be an x or a theta. The b value is just 1 and it doesn't change. You don't see a 1 when you write it. In order to graph this function on 0 to 2 pi, well, I made an axis from 0 to 2 pi. I first want to put my midline, which is 0. There's nothing added at the end. My amplitude is a number in front. And my period, where to get 2 pi over 3? Well, since it's a cosine graph, it's going to be 2 pi divided by b. b is 3, so 2 pi divided by 3 is 2/3 pi. So now my period's 2/3 pi. Now I want to graph this to 2 pi, so 2/3 of a pi is less than 2 pi, so I know I'm going to have multiple cycles to get the whole picture. So it's a cosine graph, so I know it's going to start at my amplitude. So I'm going to start at 4. And by the way, remember your midline 0. So I'm going to start at high at 4. And then I know it's going to end at 4 again. Halfway between here and here, it's going to drop to negative 4. That's just how it works. Amplitude's up 4, down 4, up 4, down 4. So I know I'm going to start at 4, end at 4, and drop down to negative 4 halfway between. Then halfway between the middle and the beginning, it's going to hit the midline. Halfway between the middle and the last point, you're going to hit the midline again. That's just always how cosines look. All right, if it was a negative a value, you'd start down here. Okay, now there's 2 pi. Let's put that in effect. Now, why is one cycle end right here? Well, if this is pi, I want to go 2/3 of pi. So I broke this pi length into thirds. 1, 2. So wouldn't this be 2/3 of pi? 1, 2, 3. So this is 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So I want one cycle being in 2/3. And then, so that would be the graph. So if this is multiple choice, you look for just this. But to keep it going, to go all the way to 0 to 2 pi, I just keep the cycles going. So I go another, well, I just go every 2 marks, I'm going to make a graph. So I'm going to go 1/3, 2/3, make another graph. 1/3, 2/3, make another graph, and now I'm to 2 pi. But really, you just look for this one, and you'll probably get it. Because it's multiple choice, you don't have to really worry about that as much. For this problem, we want the amplitude and the period. So to get the period, all we're looking for is from the beginning to finish the cycle. So it ends right there. So that is between these two numbers, between 0.08 and 0.1, that's 0.09. So that's the period. And the amplitude is how high and low the hill and valley are. So if you look at this carefully, that's 2.5. It's 3, so 2.5. Goes up 2.5 and down 2.5 is your amplitude. And that's what you're looking for. It's okay to have decimals because that's the increments. Alrighty, graphing with a phase shift is always, I hate the most doing these. So we notice here, I notice my midline is going to be 1, so I put a midline of 1. My amplitude's 1, so I know I'm going to go up 1 and down 1. I know it's a cosine, so I know I'm going to start at the highest point. Now what's weird here is my phase shift is pi over 4. This right here is saying I'm going to go right pi over 4. So you see right here, this is pi over 2. So pi over 4 is halfway. So I know I'm going to start my graph for a cosine here, 1 above the midline, and it's going to go one below here. I'm going to start at pi over 4, halfway between 0 and pi over 2. I'm going to go up 1. All right, so that's my starting point, at pi over 4 to the right. Now, if that was a positive pi over 4, I'd be starting over here, negative pi over 4. All right, but I'm starting right here. So my cosine starts there, and it's going to go down and back up. Now, my period is 2 pi. So from here to here is going to be 2 pi. Normally, from here to here is 2 pi. So I'm going to go, since I started a quarter over, I'm going to end a quarter over from here. Can I get that? I'm starting a quarter, so I'm going to end a quarter over from 2 pi. So you look at that, I just drew my graph, boom. And I remember, halfway between, I'm going to hit my lowest point, 1 down, and then halfway between this dot and this dot, I'm going to be hitting the midline. Halfway between here and here, I'm going to hit right here. Now, how did I know I hit exactly right here? Well, you have to think in quarters, which is kind of confusing. But if you just basically look for the starting point and know the ending is going to be a quarter past 2 pi, you can kind of just look for it because it is multiple choice. Now, why did I highlight this in yellow? Because it wanted this. It wanted from 0 to 2 pi. But what I'd be looking for is a graph that goes from here to here. And then I just kind of add a little bit of curve to see what I am doing. So I'm going to add a little curve back. So that right there is 0 to 2 pi. But don't really let that scare you. You're just going to look at all the graphs and find where it starts a pi over 4 over and has all the other properties the way they should be. So to find out how many cycles this will have, you don't care about the amplitude, you don't care about the midline, all you care about is this right here. So B is pi over 4. This is tangent, so we know the period is going to be pi divided by pi over 4. So pi divided by pi over 4, well, you make that a multiply and flip this. Those cancel, leaving you 4. So I know my period is now 4. So if my period's 4, and I have 0 to 12, so how many 4s will I have from 0 to 12? Well, take 12 divided by 4, that'd be 3. I would have 3 cycles of 4 within 0 to 12. So my answer is B. Alrighty, to write the equation for this graph, well, you can tell right away, hopefully you can see this is a cosine graph from here to here. You could also think of it as a sine graph from here, but I'm going to go with a cosine graph from here to here. And since it's a multiple choice test, you look and see what the name of all the answers are to see what kind of graph they're looking for. That's what's kind of annoying when there's a phase shift. So your cosine graph is starting here. That is a phase shift. So how far over did this cosine graph start? Well, if this is pi, this is 1, 2, 3, so it's a third of pi. So hopefully you can see this would be pi over 3. That's kind of hard to see for some people, but and this is pi, and you have 1, 2, 3 spaces. You know that's a third, 2/3, 3/3. So I know I started at pi over 3. That's why I have pi over 3 right here. Now, why is that a negative right there? It's a negative because it started in the positive direction. It's always opposite inside. So if it started over here at pi over 3, negative pi over 3, that'd be a plus right here. Now, why do I have a 2 right here? Well, you notice my amplitude's 2. I went up 2, down 2, up 2, down 2. So you can see that right here. I go up 2, down 2. My midline, as you can see right here, is 1. So as you can tell, my midline's negative 1, sorry. My midline is negative 1. So midline's negative 1, amplitude this. Period, how do I know my period's 2 pi? Well, if you look at it carefully, it didn't start from here to here. Or actually, let me start over. From here, if I kept my graph going, wouldn't it hit right here? So if you think if I started from a third, I go to another third, you can kind of see the period's 2 pi. You could also look at all the answers and notice what are the numbers in front of the x's. If they're all the same, you don't have to worry about the period. So most likely this is mostly going to be focusing on the phase shift, and these numbers might not even be that important. Okay, remember 2 pi, if your period's, this is a sinusoid, so 2 pi divided by 2 pi equals 1. That is why there is a 1 right here. There's really no number in front. So always remember, if your period is 2 pi, there's no number in front because it's a 1. Alrighty, so what does this mean? What's the translation of this? Well, hopefully you've caught on. What is f plus x plus 3? So when you have an x plus 3 inside of a function, hopefully you know this is your h, which is a left-right movement. And remember, when you have inside of a function, this is your h, it's always the opposite. So what's the opposite of positive 3? It's negative 3. So negative 3 would be this way 3 units. So that's why we went left 3 units. Now this one it's outside. This is your k value. When you add or subtract something to a function, it's moving it up or down. Since it's negative, I go down 6 units. So if it's inside the function, this is your h. If it's outside, that's your k. And also remember, inside goes left and right, outside goes up and down. This one always is the opposite. This does exactly what it says. All right, so we're going to graph this equation. You can see there's a value of 1. Only thing that there's no midline. So all I got to do is look at our period. Our period is going to be, well, it's going to be pi divided by b. So pi divided by 1/4. So when you divide, you flip and multiply. So it was pi times 4. So your period's 4 pi. So I know my tangent graph is going to go up and down. It's going to start here at 0 and end at pi because there's no phase shift. So we start at 0. We end at 4 pi because our period is 4 pi. Now it does say to graph from 0 to 2 pi, but I'm going to graph the whole thing and then look back at it. So again, you start here, you end here. If the graphs you have don't let you see that, try to extend it. Try to maybe sketch it on a piece of paper and see what would it look beyond, because this is kind of mean because this is going beyond what they'll give you in the picture or expect of you. So that's why I highlighted in yellow, because all they wanted was this part of the graph. Again, you start here, end at 4 pi, halfway between you have an asymptote. Halfway between here, you go up a value, which is 1. So go up 1. Halfway between here, you can go down 1. And there's your tangent graph. Again, this is all you would see for this equation. Maybe they give you a little bit more here to see what it looked like on that side. But be careful. Remember, for tangent, it's pi divided by b. For sinusoids, it's 2 pi divided by b. All right, let's find the amplitude of this periodic function. Well, the amplitude is just from the middle, how far up and down it goes. So first you have to find the midline, which would be -3, but they don't care. And you can tell this one's going up 1, down 1, up 1, down 1. So my amplitude is 1. In order to find some asymptotes for this equation, it helps make a quick sketch. So you know the midlines on the amplitude, the a value, is 1. There's nothing added or subtracted, so all we got to worry about is this. So this b value is going to give us our period. So we take pi divided by 2 pi, pi's cancel, leaving you a half. So we know a dot is going to be at every half. So we're going to put a dot every half. And we start at 0 because there's no phase shift. So half, another half, another half, we have dots. Halfway between, you have asymptotes. So if it wants 2 asymptotes, well, we can do halfway between here would be 1/4, halfway between here would be 3/4, halfway between here would be 5/4, and so forth. So you can put any numbers you want. It's multiple choice, just look for the numbers, and it really, really helps to make a sketch. Alrighty, another amplitude period problem. We know this is going to be our amplitude. We know this will give us our period. This is not your period. It's a sine graph, so you know it's going to be 2 pi divided by b. So it's just 2/3 pi. Done. All right, for this question, be careful. Let's read it carefully. The graph of sine theta is right here. Use this graph as sine theta. So that is sine theta. To find the value of sine theta for pi radians. So what it wants to basically know is to put pi in for theta. So sine theta. So it's basically saying plug theta in what's your output. That's all it's saying. So at theta, what is your sine value? Well, your sine value is 0. So what would this mean? If I asked for find it at pi over 2, so what's sine pi over 2? So what would that equal? That's what it's asking for. What pi over 2, that would mean it's 1. Oh, okay, that would be 1. All right, what if it asked for at 3 pi over 2? Well, 3 pi over 2 would be -1. All right, now it would be harder if it asked for like pi over 4. It'd be like some decimal between 0.5 and 1, so maybe 0.75 or something. That'd be a little bit harder. You kind of approximate your decimal. But hopefully it's more like this 0, 1, -1, or 0. But you could, again, at this point, what would be, this would be 5 pi over 4. For 5 pi over 4, it'd be negative about 0.7. But just so be aware, it's just saying what is the output at this value of the sine graph. So let's make a graph that starts at, has a value of 4, 7 maximum and a minimum at 0, -1. So 0, -1 and 4, 7. That will only be half my cycle. All right, so I need to complete it this way. So once I do that, I notice it's a cosine graph by doing that. And I know it's an upside down cosine graph. So I know I go from -1 all the way to 7. So if I go from -1 to 7 divided by 2, my midline is going to be 3. So that's why I got my midline of 3. Then if you look carefully, how far up and down did you go? Right here, how far up and down did you go? And if you think about that, you will notice you went up and down 4. So that would be my amplitude. So if you look at this, I have a -4 because it's upside down. I have a +3 midline. Why did I say cosine? Because this is a cosine graph. Sines start at the midline. Okay, so next we have to think, how do we get pi over 4? Well, if you look at this carefully, from here to here is a value of 4, and then you go all the way to 8 for the whole cycle. So my period's 8. So my period's 8, I do 2 pi divided by the period to get b. So when I reduce this, I get pi over 4. So pi over 4 is my b value. Now be very careful in the test. If you have your period, you probably need your b. If you have your b, you probably need your period. Be careful going back and forth. It's the same formula, 2 pi divided by b or 2 pi divided by p. It looks the same formula. You just got to go back and forth. Just make sure you choose the right one. People a lot of times choose the wrong one. All right, if I'm going to write the sine function for this, we know it's sine because it starts at the midline and ends again at the midline. So there's one cycle. Now that tells me my period. So from 0 to pi over 2 is the period. Now how do I know that's pi over 2? Well, if that's pi, and it looks like it went half the way, so it's half of pi. That's how I found the period. Now my 4 is my amplitude. My midline, as you can tell, goes up 4 and down 4. So my midline's at 0. So be careful. Sometimes you got to be careful of your midline. And my period is pi over 2 for my equation, so I don't put pi over 2 there. I don't put my period. I have my b value. So since it's a sine, I go 2 pi divided by pi over 2. Remember, when you divide, you flip and multiply. Pi's cancel, leaving you 4. So your b value is 4, so that would be a 4 there, not your period. Do not put your period there. The number in front's your amplitude. We went up 4 and down 4. Just be careful if it's negative or positive. This one is positive because the graph goes up first. If it went down first, you put a -4. All right, in order to write a sine function with the amplitude 7 and a period of 4 pi, well, you put sine. You put amplitude of 7 right there, easy. You could also make it a -7 because it doesn't say anything about what type of amplitude. So it could be either, technically. Now, how to get 1/2 here? Why don't you just put 4 pi? Where did I get 1/2 from? Remember, it's a sine graph. So it's going to be 2 pi divided by your period. Pi's cancel, leaving you 1/2. That's where the 1/2 came from. Your period does not go here. Your b value does. Be very, very careful of that. Alrighty, let's find the period of this graph. Well, we start at 0. It looks like a sine graph because it starts at the midline, goes down and back up, and that's the end, and that is 2 pi. Well, that's an easy one. That's your normal sine graph. It's just a negative a value. So, okay, that's all you need is the period, 2 pi, from start to end, one cycle. You could also go from here to here, but that's more complicated. You just got to find where it starts, where it ends. You could even go from here to here, okay? But that, again, is more complicated. I would simply start at 0 the best, and then, bam, you can see the exact number of how far it goes from 0. Done. Alrighty, in order to sketch this, we know my amplitude is 3. I know my b value is 2, so I go 2 pi divided by 2 because it's the sine. 2's cancel, pi. So my period's pi, my amplitude's 3. I have no midline, so I know my sine graph starts here. I know I'm going to end at pi. I know halfway between, on a sine graph, it hits the midline again. And if my period's 3, my amplitude's 3, I know right here in the middle of these two dots, I'm going to go up 3. And right here in the middle of these two dots, I'm going to go down 3. Remember, sines start on the midline, cosines start on the amplitude, max or min, depending on if it's a negative amplitude, a value or not. For this last question, we want the period of this tangent. Be careful when you read this. This is tangent. Some people might misread it. Tangent. So tangent is pi divided by b. So pi divided by b, that's your b. When you divide, you flip and multiply, so this becomes 5 over pi. Cancel the pi's. So it leaves us with 5. So my period is 5.